I recently gave a talk at the University of Texas in San Antonio. It was the first campus talk I've done in, about 2.5 years, I guess, really since before COVID. What happened is right after COVID, the campuses have been kind of immobilized, demobilized. A lot of them went to online classes. So some of them have gotten back into normal operations, but still the idea of bringing in speakers from the outside, it's only now kind of starting up. And of course, I have the daily podcast. Debbie keeps reminding me, see, campus lectures are typically in the middle of the week. Whereas when I speak to Republican clubs, Reagan dinners, Lincoln dinners, those tend to be on the weekend. It's a little easier for me to pull that off. A little harder for me on a Tuesday or Wednesday to march off to a campus. So in any event, I did do this talk. It was sponsored by the Turning Point chapter at UT San Antonio. We had a nice crowd, actually an interesting mix, mostly students, but also a mix of people from the community. And there was a fairly heavy police presence. I think the police had, the campus police had checked out Turning Point events on other campuses. And I think some of those have gotten kind of raucous. I was kind of ready for anything. But as it turned out, it was, people were, I'd call them Texas well-behaved. You had leftists there and they asked questions, but they asked questions respectfully. The only time one guy got kind of shouted down, not shouted down, but like shouted at by people in the audience was he had like a list of questions and he wasn't like letting up. And it was like, come on, you've had your chance, let somebody else talk. Well, one of the questions that was asked to me by someone on the left, but they were genuinely asking. This is, when people ask questions, sometimes they just ask to show me up. Like, Dinesh, I know more than you. Let me expose you as a charlatan. And that doesn't really work, but they try that. But in this case, the student simply asked, what is conservatism? I think it was a black kid who asked. And just what is conservatism? And I want to kind of share my answer because it's kind of worth thinking about. We get caught up in day-to-day issues and we don't step back. And what does conservatism mean? And what does it mean today? And I answered it in two ways to say, look, there is a kind of classic or traditional definition of conservatism. I'm going to give you that. And then there's a sort of modern American definition. I'm going to give you that. So the classic definition of conservatism is just this: to conserve. But to conserve means that over the long space of history, a long period of time, many things have been tried. And some have worked and some have failed. So the wisdom of conservatism is, let's look to the long example of the past, not just what happened yesterday or even 10 years ago or even 100 years ago. Let's look back deep within the resources of our civilization, or even humanity, and look at time-tested ways of doing things that are successful and conserve that. So conservatism is past-oriented, but it's not based upon something happened before, so let's do it again. It's also not based upon something is a tradition, so that automatically makes it good. There obviously have been traditions of slavery, of anti-Semitism. There are bad traditions we have no intention of retaining. But look at the past as a tried and true measure of what does work and what doesn't, and learn from it. That's the conservative insight. Think of the progressive idea is let's base our strategy on the future. Wait, the future hasn't even occurred. So you can come up with a blueprint, you can come up with a utopia, you can come up with a dream, but how do you know if that dream's going to work? How do you know if you can convert it successfully into reality? How do you know if it's congruent with human nature? So classic conservatism values the past more than, you may say, the quote, lessons of the future, because there are no lessons of the future. The future hasn't occurred yet. Now, in America, conservatism means something a little bit more concrete. We had a revolution, the American Revolution, and conservatism in the modern American sense means conserving not just the past, any past, but specifically the principles of the American Revolution. And what are those? Well, they have to do with separation of powers, the Republican form of government, which is accountability in the end to the people, representative democracy, the appreciation and implementation of a written constitution, checks and balances. I mean, one of the biggest problems in our society today is checks and balances have sort of broken down. Judges are supposed to be a check on prosecutors. In the case of January 6 defendants, they're not. The media is supposed to be a check on the legislative and the executive branch, and many times they're not. So individual rights, our rights in the Bill of Rights clearly specify their rights against the state, their rights against the government. Congress shall not do this and Congress shall not do that. And our rights to conscience and free speech and equal treatment under the law. So this is the complex organism of government, which has over 200 years, again, proven itself to be successful, to be in conformity with human nature, to bring out the best in people. This is what, at a time when these principles are gravely endangered, in which this constitutional arrangement is being just chucked aside by the left and by the Democrats, this is what we are now trying to conserve.